It's the week ending Saturday the 5th of September, and this is the Week Unwrapped. Over the past 7 days, we've seen a cargo ship sinking off the coast of Japan, the first commercial flight between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, and the UK's children returning to school, many for the first time in 6 months. But we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Ollie Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the Week's digital team is Kari Wilkin. From the Week magazine, we have Mr. Theo Tait. And from the Week USA, Jessica Hullinger. And Jess, you're starting the show this week. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
The foldable phone is here, and it's a flop.
This is a compact device, but with a large screen. Impossible, right? Well, it folds, and it's made of ultra-thin glass, thinner than a single hair on your head. And the hinge doesn't just open and close, but stays put.
A promotional film for the catchily named new phone, the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 2 5G, or Z Fold 2 as they call it in your home nation, Jess. But why is this your story of the week?
Well, so this week Samsung unveiled this phone that it is selling for an exorbitant amount, about $2,000. And there was a lot of hype around this phone. Foldable phones have been sort of really interesting to gadget consumers and fanatics for a while. There's been demand for them. And there are actually a number of them on the market. There's one from Huawei, one from Lenovo and Motorola, and there's even one possibly coming from Google.
Yeah, well, hold on. There was a lot of hype around the phone when they first announced it, but this is the second iteration.
Right.
And I'm guessing from what you said earlier, you used the word flop. You're about to say it isn't worth the hype.
Right. So the idea was that this would sort of inject some novelty into the smartphone market, which has been flagging for a while. And yeah, you're right. This is the second iteration of this phone. The first one was also sort of a flop because it was equally expensive, and it was meant to fold down the middle. You're supposed to be able to unfold it from a phone into a sort of tablet and not see any sort of problem with the hinging. The hinging wasn't working. There were other sort of bugs. And this second iteration seems to have fixed some of the bugs, but the problem is that the demand for it isn't there. So they were projecting that this would have a lot of buyers, and also that in general in 2020 that foldable phones would be really, really popular. But unfortunately, according to the Wall Street Journal, Samsung projected 6 million foldable device shipments in 2020, and halfway through the year, they hit only 1/10 of that target.
Okay, and this has resonance for the rest of us. Why? I mean, if you're not on the Samsung board, why do you care?
Right. So the reason why I think this resonates for the rest of us is because experts are speculating that the reason that this phone and others like it have not done well so far this year is due to the pandemic, right? So it's not just because the market has slumped and spending a lot of money on a device that the novelty of it is that it folds, seems ridiculous, but also because the pandemic has changed our behavior, and therefore changed the stuff we need to do and things we need from our gadgets.
So it's partly maybe, Theo, about the fact that we're not commuting as much as we used to. Something I guess that you think about too. I mean, you're lucky to be editor of a magazine that gets posted through people's doors rather than one that people habitually pick up at the newsstand on the way to work.
Yeah, I mean, newsstands have been hit very badly through all this. I think smartphone sales have been going down for a bit generally, haven't they? As I suppose the market got saturated after the sort of 10, 15 year surge. But now they seem to really, really be doing badly, and I suppose that makes sense, doesn't it? Why would you buy some amazing device that you can use on the tube to write an email if you're actually at home with all your computers sat around you?
But then doing really badly, Kari, is a question of perspective, isn't it? We were talking on the show just a few weeks ago about Apple now being worth over $1 trillion or whatever it is. I mean, obviously, some of the tech companies are doing very well out of coronavirus too.
Yeah, I mean, smartphone sales have really slumped. You know, they've been going down for a while, but they've fallen by a record 20% year on year in the first quarter of this year. So, and I think there's so many factors, as Jess was saying. Lockdowns, you've closed these shops, so you don't get to go and see these lovely flashy gadgets up close and be wooed by them, and you're not seeing your friends so much to show them off. And plus, there's the economic impact impact of the pandemic. But Apple, as you say, Apple revenues have been going up. And I think that's because that reflects the kind of gadgets that we do want during this time. Things like Apple sales of iPads are up by 33% and Mac sales are up by 21% year on year in the latest fiscal quarter. So it's that shift away. I don't think the demand for gadgets has gone away. It's just we want very different things now because our lives have changed so much.
So basically quality products that work at home rather than ones that we take out with us on the move, Jess.
Yeah, exactly. I bought an iPad for my family during lockdown because we wanted to be able to Skype with my parents in America on a larger screen, and we didn't want to have to look directly at our tiny phone screens. So yeah, I think that that's absolutely right. I mean, the selling point of this foldable phone was that you could sort of like adjust it and customize the way that it looks in a small space. So like on the tube or in the office or whatever. And yeah, you're absolutely right. We just don't need that necessarily right now. It's interesting, though, like I was looking at some other trends that have emerged out of the coronavirus pandemic, gadget trends. And one thing that surprised me was that sales of webcams are up. And I was surprised by that because I associate sort of like, webcams that you attach to the top of your screen as something that I had years ago. And I haven't had one since I got a laptop, right? It's built into my screen. It's also built into my phone. But it occurred to me that a lot of people, maybe who are, not super tech savvy, only have desktops, and suddenly they're all working from home. And so you saw in the first few months of the pandemic, the webcams online were just selling out. You couldn't get your hands on one of them. So it's the return of the webcam, which is kind of strange, but I guess it makes sense.
And there, I guess, as well, you see, Theo, the generational shift perhaps in people who are buying technology now. Arguably older demographics. This is a generalization, don't get me wrong. I know there's plenty of people, who are 50, 60 plus who are really into their tech. But older demographics tended not to be the group that wanted to test out something new when it was new. But that group is the group buying stuff because everyone's buying stuff because those are the grandparents that, Jess's kids want to Skype. So I guess they're going for easier stuff.
I imagine that most households, certainly mine have gone through a sort of not particularly reassuring technology revolution during this period where you've just, everyone has just gone online in a way that they never have before. And, the children, my children have done sort of vast amounts of time on computers, which never happened before. And, necessarily a bit unsupervised from time to time. I think everyone's habits would have changed. I'm sure they'll look back and see that all these trends were beginning here and will affect everything for probably years afterwards.
And might this mean a boom in things, Kari, that perhaps hadn't taken off in the past, like VR?
I think there will be a boom in things like VR. For example, I read recently that hardware sales for VR and augmented reality are forecast to increase tenfold in the next 3 years, and I'm sure that's all linked to the pandemic. Also, I think trends that were already there are going to be speeded up massively. For example, sales of Chromebooks. As Theo was saying, kids spending so much time in front of screens because they're having to do remote learning. Even I read there were reports from the US in August that there was just a laptop shortage. The government was trying to source laptops for schools because of increased demand for remote learning. But due to supply chain issues and sanctions on China and various other issues, they just couldn't get their hands on them. And, even in January last year, Google was reporting that 30 million Chromebooks were being used in schools worldwide, which was up 5 million on the previous year. But I'll be very interested to see the final figures for this year. I imagine, demand and sales will just absolutely rocket.
I think this sort of goes to the point that I want to make, which is that I think what we want from our tech now isn't necessarily bells and whistles. We want affordable technology that does what it's supposed to really well. And that's where you see things like the Chromebook. I mean, Chromebook, it's affordable. It can access the internet. It's good for online learning. I think we're going to see more products like that maybe are less sort of flashy, but are very effective and reliable, and also that almost everybody can afford. And I think this is actually where things get complicated when it comes to VR. Yes, of course, there's entertainment that's going online. It would be great if you could, plug on a VR headset and, attend a concert of your favorite artist. But the problem is right now the headsets for virtual reality are really expensive and are kind of clunky. They're not very user-friendly. So I think, in order for that to really take off, it would have to come down in price. And I also think the need for it would have to get much stronger, right? I think right now we're sort of emerging out of lockdown. It's getting a little bit safer here and there. Potentially there's a vaccine and various treatments. And they've been projecting virtual reality would take off for years and years and years. I think maybe this might push it to get better. But until it becomes a bit more affordable, I don't think that we'll see a huge surge in it.
On the other hand, VR use is increasing massively within businesses, whether for training or meetings or better public services. Facebook's VR headset brand recently released a platform aimed at commercial use. So I think that is one area of growth, at least, for the industry.
Isn't it funny how that area of tech that was seen as so glamorous and sexy is now going to be basically for video conferencing?
Yeah, it kind of kills the glamour.
I mean, in fairness to Samsung, their phones might not be selling at the moment, but a foldable phone, a real one that actually has effectively a tablet inside is real innovation. What innovations can we see on the horizon that have been caused by the pandemic that are exciting? Theo?
Well, I'm not sure exciting is exactly the word, but we've seen quite a lot of high-tech masks have been produced. For instance, there's a Japanese version that can translate voice commands into several different languages.
That's quite useful because, your voice gets muffled anyway, never mind the fact that people can't understand you in a particular language.
There are lots of high-tech face masks coming out. There's one that was, I just saw today from LG that is basically an air filter, an electric air filter that you can put on your face. And it looks the wearer looks a little bit like Bane from Batman, but yeah, it's sort of a portable, wearable air filter. The company claims that it can block 99.95% of airborne particles as small as 0.1 microns. But they actually haven't said that it can protect against coronavirus. And actually, various experts have said, you shouldn't wear a mask with a filter because it doesn't prevent you from exhaling the virus. So, we see a lot of sort of flashy stuff coming out right now. Whether or not any of it will be effective is another question. But I do think you also see higher demand for health tracking apps and high-tech health stuff. So there was some speculation about whether or not in the future your phone or your gadgets or your wearables could actually detect coronavirus and tell you that you have it, whether by actually testing your saliva or if it will track it through your heart rate or your sleep. So I think, because in some places it's quite difficult to get a test, it would be kind of amazing if you could get an early alert from your gadgets.
Kari.
One gadget, just so on the slightly wackier end of the spectrum again, it's from an Italian lighting brand called Artemide, I think. And they've integrated UV light technology that kills germs into their lamps to turn them into basically room sanitizers. So presumably you leave the room when it goes into that mode. But I just love the thought that you switch on your light and your room gets cleaned. And I kind of choose to believe that it just means cleaned in every sense. So you can just ditch the housework as well as not worrying about COVID.
Okay, so don't invest in Apple and Samsung. Buy shares in Italian light companies. That's what we're saying?
Exactly.
I'm sure that's very sound advice. If only John was here. Right, Kari, you're up next after this. Okay, Kari, your turn. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
Is big oil set to flood Africa with plastic?
On World Environment Day, Kenya banned all single-use plastics such as water bottles and straws from its national parks, beaches, forests and other protected areas. The implementation of the ban, first announced a year ago, was ordered in a letter from Tourism Minister Najib Balala last week. The ban took effect on Friday, 3 years after Kenya announced one of the world's strictest bans on plastic bags.
A report on the African News YouTube channel on the recent ban of single-use plastics in certain parts of Kenya. Kari, that was back in June. What's been happening this week?
Right, so Kenya has been leading the way in the global efforts to tackle the plastic waste crisis. Only 3 years ago, it imposed what was the world's strictest ban on the use, manufacturing and import of plastic bags, and that inspired similar bans across Africa and in many other countries across the world. So this is all great. But Kenya right now is trying to negotiate a trade deal with the US, which would be the first US bilateral trade deal with a nation in sub-Saharan Africa. And it could be this deal could be the model for other African nations. So there's a huge amount riding on this. And obviously, Kenyan leaders are very keen to get this through. Now, Big Oil have spotted this and they've spotted an opportunity. And right now, Big Oil is facing two major problems. But first, oil firms need to find new revenue sources amid the global shift away from fossil fuels for energy, and also bans on imports of plastic waste by countries such as China, which banned imports of most plastic wastes back in 2018. It's forced these firms to look for new, essentially dumping grounds.
Okay, so that's the background. And what is happening this week?
Right. Well, a Greenpeace affiliate called Unearthed has, unearthed a letter from the American Chemical Council, the ACC, whose members include major oil companies, to the Office of US Trade Representative, which is basically overseeing these trade talks with Kenya. And they are lobbying, pushing the Trade Administration to use this trade deal to pressure Kenya to change its stance against plastic waste, to basically row back on this ban in order to basically use Kenya. In fact, the letter says Kenya could serve in the future as a hub for supplying US-made chemicals and plastics to other markets in Africa. So it spotted the opportunity to sell even more plastic to this massive market. I mean,
But also, crucially, rowing back on all that stuff means that they can once again, they wouldn't use these words obviously, but they can once again start using Kenya as a dumping ground for their used single-use plastic.
That's the other thing. They're also lobbying against changes to a recently signed international agreement that from next year will put limits on plastic waste being exported to poorer nations. So it's a double assault, basically. They want to sell more plastic to Africa and send more plastic waste there.
Theo, it's fascinating, isn't it, to look at what's happening to the oil and gas industry as a result of the decreased use of their product due to the virus and other effects. This is one such ripple, isn't it? They're trying to pivot into plastic production, and there are obstacles now because, we've spent the last 10 years trying to recycle our plastic.
Well, I think they are seeing and expecting a gradual a decrease in the amount of stuff for transport and the amount of fuels used for transport, and an increase in petrochemicals generally, which isn't just plastics but also millions of other, cleaning products and thousands of other things that all use fossil fuels. But yeah, we are seeing that a bit. It seems really interesting to me that the toughest bans on plastic are in sub-Saharan Africa. Kenya's is said to have the world's strictest ban. Rwanda's got a very strict ban as well. And in fact, there are 30 sub-Saharan African countries that have serious plastic bag bans. And I suppose the reason is that if you don't have centralised and well-run waste management, then the effects are that much more horrific, because it tends to plug up sewers and gutters and everything like that. And also, I think malaria is a real problem with plastic bags. So it's just quite interesting that they have managed to sort of get ahead of much of the world with these bans, because they've had to, really.
Yes, and Jess, those are the very problems, aren't they, that the US oil and gas industry, who've spent more than $200 billion on chemical and manufacturing plants in the United States over the past decade, don't want the American public to be seeing. That's why they want to ship the waste somewhere else.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we spend a lot of time and energy telling Americans that they can recycle their plastic and that it is perfectly fine. It's just out of sight, out of mind. So the problem, of course, is that we ship all of our plastic waste elsewhere. And in 2018, before 2018, we were shipping most of it to China. In 2018, China said no thanks, no more, and they banned imports of plastic waste. And since then, it was going to places like Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, and all of those countries have seen their pollution and their waste go way up. And so they have also hinted at or implemented various bans on importing plastic waste. And so America is moving towards looking at Africa as a place to send their plastic waste. And actually, plastic exports to Africa have more than quadrupled in 2019 from a year earlier. So, yeah, I mean, we need somewhere to put all of that plastic waste so it doesn't bother us, and so we send it elsewhere.
We also do, Kari, need plastic, don't we? I mean, that's the other thing. So many things we buy come in it, and some of it, yes, is single use, and we should be reducing that. But some of it, that's frankly the best material that's been designed to carry that particular thing. And people need to manufacture plastic, and people want to buy plastic. So what's to be done?
Well, I mean, as I said, the ACC, this that represents all these major oil companies, it's been lobbying against this what's called the Basel Convention, which would basically make it far harder to ship plastic waste to developed countries. They have to give prior consent. And even the US recycling industry actually has come out against and spoken out against this convention. And the argument is basically that it's actually just going to prevent countries that don't have recycling facilities from sending it to those that do. Now, environmentalists sort of argue, well, yeah, but a lot of these countries that do have recycling facilities are just being inundated with such a mass of plastic that they can't recycle it all. And a lot of it just ends up in dumps, and surely it'd be better to find alternatives to plastic and to use less overall. Around 190 countries have signed this convention, so they clearly don't agree, but the US is not one of the countries that has ratified the convention. So, and the US has, as Jess was saying, has major reasons not to. It's the biggest plastic waste producer and exporter in the world. It exported more than 450 million kilos of plastic waste to a total of 96 countries last year. So it's all very well to talk about, yes, we need plastic and yes, we can recycle it, but it's the sheer amount it's not a feasible option, really.
I haven't seen the Sorry, I was going to say I haven't seen the figures yet for this year, but I imagine we will see an absolutely massive surge in the use of single-use plastic in Britain and in comparable countries during coronavirus, because it has been absolutely essential to the PPE and to no one's wanting to reuse things. I mean, the supermarket deliveries, which used to come into your kitchen and dump everything on the floor, is now bags at the door. I mean, I think we're going to see a very big growth in that this year.
And Jess, are you surprised by a US lobbying organisation working so far beyond the borders of the US? I mean, in a way that, why should they be able to impact policy in Kenya?
I was actually really surprised by this. I mean, I suppose it was a bit naive, but when I read that lobbyists were interfering in a sort of, sneaky way, weaseling their way into conversations about trade deals and whispering into the ears of negotiators, I found that so alarming. But I guess in a way it shouldn't be alarming at all. I mean, of course they're doing that. And I mean, nothing really surprises me anymore in American politics, but I was disheartened, I suppose. And yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of nuts that we're talking about plastic when it comes to a trade deal between two nations. I don't know. It all seems very contrived and strange, but not surprising, no.
What I found particularly depressing, actually, was that some of the major firms represented by the ACC, including Shell and Exxon and Total, last year they co-founded a $1 billion initiative that pledges to create a world free of plastic waste. And they've been accused of double dealing by US Democratic Senator Tom Udall, who last year introduced legislation to tackle the plastic waste crisis. And he says that, quote, "These firms are pointing the finger at developing nations for the plastic waste showing up in our oceans, but are actually offshoring their responsibilities to make billions of dollars." So there's a lot of PR front going on, all this push to recycle and everything, but ultimately it comes down to money, as it always does.
And Theo, that's been the playbook the whole way through the growing awareness of climate change, isn't it? That the big petrochemical companies have been involved in PR strategies to suggest that they're not part of the problem, but part of the solution. But I suppose it isn't just a PR line, in the sense that for it really truly to be solved, the petrochemical companies are going to have to be involved. Perhaps not in the ways they're suggesting, but by producing less. But they are going to have to be involved in it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. They'll have to. They're going to be. That's where the pivot's going to happen. It's just a question of like with BP and their sort of regular greenwashes that they do every 10 years. The question that we're all asking is when and how, and there aren't any simple answers to that quite yet, are they? I think we should probably add that the ACC did put out a sort of denial about this. It never mentioned Kenya's approach to single-use plastic bags once in our comments. in a statement to AP. I mean, the lobbying bodies, it's what they do. I mean, the trade deals are absolutely central to their, to their interests, and so it isn't particularly unusual to find them expressing an opinion about these things. Though obviously we may feel that it is slightly disturbing.
Okay, Theo, you are going to be finishing the show. You're up next after this. Okay, Theo, you are finishing the show. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
For me, it was the week when the New Guinea singing dog made its voice heard once again.
Theo, what was that? The New Guinea singing dog?
That's right. It's a cousin of the dingo, which used to be common in the highlands of New Guinea. It used to be kept as a domestic animal, and also there were lots of them in the wild. But they were thought to have gone extinct, except for a few hundred in zoos, which are now getting dangerously inbred. And none has been seen in the wild was been confirmed in the wild since the 1970s.
But I sense a but coming. Am I right?
This week, we had the confirmation that there's an intrepid researcher called James McIntyre, who is the president of the New Guinea Highland Wild Dog Foundation, which I hadn't heard of before, who has done plenty of research on it and has found DNA from trapped wild dogs, and it now has been confirmed that there is a sizable community of them living on the Indonesian side of New Guinea in the highlands.
Okay, so that's good news because, I guess, did they go extinct naturally or because of man-made intervention? Or
there's lots of mining in the area, and there's been lots of encroachment into the New Guinea highlands. So it's good news because it's always good news when a species turns out not to have gone extinct.
Fair enough. I guess we can't really debate that. Although I'd put a word in for wasps. They're
very good at climbing trees. They're very shy, and according to one biologist, they're almost preternaturally canny. But obviously the singing is what we're here for. Interestingly, they don't bark, but they howl in a chorus together. And it's in a harmonic vocalization that we've just heard, which has been described as a wolf howl with overtones of a whale song. They all sing together, or one or two start, they all sing together, and then they stop together instantaneously.
Jess, does this story give you hope? Does the howl make you proud?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, can never be upset or, find bad news in a species actually being alive when we thought it was dead. I don't know. I think it's interesting the sort of harmonic sounds that they make, being able to study that. Researchers see potential to study their vocalization and sort of figure out how it could be applied to research in human vocalization, which is interesting. But I think it also they're looking to study how humans have domesticated dogs, because apparently these animals are sort of a missing link in a sort of evolution of dogs over time, which is really interesting. I am a little bit concerned about what they plan to do with the dogs that they've found. It seems like what they want to do is in order to try and bolster the population, they want to breed the wild dogs with the ones that they have in captivity, with the idea being that the animals that are in captivity have a sort of more pure DNA lineage, because the ones that are in the wild have been mating with dogs that are not part of their breeds and species. So, yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant about that. I understand why they want to do it. But I think humans' history of breeding dogs for characteristics and traits that they like has had sort of disastrous consequences on dogs in general.
Yeah, and I suppose that is one of the big differences between wild dogs and domesticated dogs, isn't it, Kari? The dogs we allow into our homes are the ones that have been kind of genetically chosen by us.
Yeah, I mean, in this particular instance, they found that the about 72% of the DNA between the captive dogs and the wild dogs was identical, and as Jess says, that could be down to the fact that the wild dogs have been interbreeding with domesticated dogs. On the other hand, it could be that the captive dogs have lost their genetic variation because they all descend from 7 or 8 wild ancestors. So, in fact, interbreeding them could push them back closer to what they were before, and I think that's one of the really exciting developments, that this could be advances in genetic engineering have paved the way for what's called de-extinction, which isn't just about bringing back animals back from the dead, those sort of scary ideas about bringing dinosaurs back, but also to save living creatures, living species on the brink of extinction. And I think that's what could hopefully, if it's done correctly, happen with these New Guinea singing dogs, as is happening with other species around the world. And I think that's a really exciting, positive development if handled correctly.
Yeah, and that research that Jess was talking about, Theo, it makes you wonder, what experiments could have been done, what lessons could have been learned scientifically from the species that have become extinct, perhaps, 100 years ago, with the developments we have now that we didn't have then.
I mean, I think, the species are becoming extinct so fast now that I think any step back from the brink is really an excellent thing. And I think definitely the idea here is that they use the wild dogs. They just want to use the wild dogs to regenerate the gene pool of the ones in captivity, because those have become dangerously inbred. So it's not actually a case of trying to create a pure breed. They're just trying to use this to mean that we then have a stable captive population, which could be used to help the wild population if necessary. Another Oceanian species is the Tasmanian tiger, which sadly became extinct sort of reasonably recently, and is a sort of fascinating evolutionary spur. Which and the idea is that this dog is supposedly or perhaps a very interesting missing link in the evolutionary chain, because actually all of these dogs it's a cousin of a dingo, and all of them were originally domesticated dogs from Southeast Asia, and they came over probably about 4,000 years ago, presumably with humans, and they then became sort of they became feral. So all of them, it's a sort of fascinating story, and they're all descendants of the wolf originally.
So it might tell us something about humans 4,000 years ago as well as dogs.
Yeah, I mean, it's to me, it's just an absolutely fascinating thought that they came to Australia and New Guinea possibly before these land masses even separated off from each other, and that might be why they're there.
Doesn't it also give you a little bit of hope that there might be other animals that we have considered extinct that are just sort of lurking beneath the surface, hiding from us? I mean, that's what I found so encouraging about this, was that for years we thought they were gone, and suddenly there they are, just wandering around a mine. We found them. I mean, it made me feel really optimistic in a way.
There's actually a term, Lazarus species. There have been other instances of animals that were thought to be dead that have then, been discovered lurking in sort of, far corners of the earth. And yeah, it's great news.
And with a little bit of human help as well. I mean, obviously there's a lot of interest in rewilding the landscape, isn't there, in various parts of the country at the moment. You can possibly even amplify that.
Yeah, and just saving sort of species that are right on the edge at the moment. There are reports really recently, which I found really uplifting, about the northern white rhino, and there's only 2 left on the planet, both in Kenya actually, and both female. But their eggs, there's a project to basically save them. It's been interrupted by COVID, but their eggs were harvested from these 2 females last year, and they've been used to create embryos using frozen sperm from late male rhinos. And the plan now is to implant them in genetically similar southern white rhino surrogates, because the two remaining northern white rhino females have got health issues, so it has to be a surrogate. But just the fact that potentially, they can create babies from the dead males.
And I'm just curious, Theo, what are the limits of your own personal enthusiasm on this story? Because you're obviously a dog guy. Would you go to Papua New Guinea to see these wild dogs? It's not my thing. I am actually, yes, a dog person. I've just got a dog this week, and I played him the New Guinea singing dog, and he was very impressed, I can only say.
Would I go to New Guinea to see? It's probably a bit of a stretch, but I do. I think that I just find, you read these stories in the news every week, and then you realise that there are these natural stories which are, in a way, which are just much more fascinating quite often.
Yes, and I suppose that ultimately, the saving of a species has greater repercussions for the planet than almost anything else we discuss, really. So it can feel like a slight story, but it isn't, is it? Thank you for that, Theo, and indeed to Jessica Hullinger and Kari Wilkin for joining me on this week's edition of The Week Unwrapped. Remember, you can download every episode of our back catalogue right now. Just search for The Week Unwrapped on your podcast app of choice. I've been Ollie Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.